welcome to our pod. And by that, I mean on Wednesdays we read. I'm Hannah.
I'm Laura.
And we are usually two best friends who do a deep dive into a new book series, one book at a time. But sometimes it's a Tuesday, and that means
And we are coloring and
we
making
are
art.
coloring into the lines and building a picture of Lisa Frank as we cover Glitter and Greed, the Lisa Frank
Lisa
story.
Frank story.
A story that is just blatantly missing Lisa Frank.
It's oddly
It's oddly not about Lisa Frank and
lacking
only
a lot of
about
detail.
Lisa Frank.
It's
If you think
such a
about it.
strange documentary. Like I've never encountered a documentary like this where it's like I watched hours of this
And
and
I learned
I
nothing.
I learned so little, but at the same time I feel like I did take in a lot. It's a strange watch.
Yes. So for people who are tuning in, who are used to us covering like amazing television shows that were like, this was so good.
This is not that situation.
This is not our situation. This is a situation of Hannah randomly was scrolling on Tickety Talk. That could or
R.I.P.
could not be with us right now. We have no idea. And like there was a random TikTok of Lisa Frank's son where he's like, here are two paintings. One is done by my mother and one is by my father. Look at the beautiful, and he like goes into great details of like the one done by his father, and it's just a football field with a football on it and
It's very
someone
basic.
holding the justice scales on it. And it's just so weird that he's like obsessed over it. And then like Lisa Franks is just like a rainbow melting. Like it's not like the biggest piece of art you're going to see ever, but it was fine. And then I was like, what was that? Like I didn't know why it was on my TikTok. I didn't know why I was looking at it. And then I closed TikTok like almost right after it. Then when I opened it up, there was another TikTok of a woman and she was like, these are two pictures. One is drawn by my father and one by my mother, Lisa Frank. This one is beautiful and it's done by my father. This one, and she like holds up a fake stick drawing and she's like, I hate you, mom. And she and then like I started talking to my sister-in-law about it, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, we're watching this. There's no way we're not watching this." Like, Laura said she was in, and then we saw
Well, the
another.
thing was, you brought it up, and friends, if you have been listening to our podcast and know anything about like my watching habits, I am interested in drama. So when Hannah started talking about this, I was like, I'm gonna watch this. I know it's gonna happen. So I had the option. Well, I shouldn't say even had the option. Hannah had suggested we do cover another series of Doctor Who. And in order to prepare myself, since it's been like a couple of years since I watched series 2 of Doctor Who, I was like, well, this is going to take me like 20 episodes.
Yeah.
But I know for a fact I'm going to blow off those 20 episodes and watch this Lisa Frank thing. Hannah, would you be okay covering the Lisa Frank documentary for a TV Tuesday? And Hannah was kind enough to oblige me.
So we ended up watching this, and again, I don't think I learned anything about Lisa Frank other than like bad management, I guess. But
And
it's
and she steals
and
from
she
people.
steals from
Bad
people.
business decisions because she's stealing other people's ideas and art from them and not crediting them when credit is due,
Yes. And
which
so
is
I think
awful.
that's the actual worst part of this documentary is you find out that like she's a bad owner. Like she doesn't
Oh, for
seem to
sure.
understand things. She seems to want to make a lot out of licensing, but not actually do the work for it.
And
Which
it seems like she's brought in a bunch of artists who she she was not a good boss. Like
no.
she did not appreciate her employees or give them the compensation or benefits that they needed and did not credit them for the work that they did for her, which seemed like quite a lot.
Yes. And so over the course of these four episodes, we kind of find out we start with like the beginning of Lisa Frank. We talk to some old college friends about like how it started, how she's always been a creative person. And then she just like started building this company of like fun things that like you could upsell because it was like pretty cartoon colors that like little girls would love. And they could sell like erasers and folders and things that people didn't even think about doing. But then she also had this like business manager that she was working with that later on in the series we find out she ends up marrying. And he ends up being like the main business drive of Lisa Frank, where he's pushing like sales and things like this. And he's actually like running the company day to day while she's like doing things that was expected of women in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, which is
Hmm.
raising their children. And then it just kind of like imploded where they had a bad like divorce. She took over the company, but like she hadn't been a part of the company in an active way in a while. And it kind of just like took a turn after that. So that's the broad strokes, but like as you get into it, I do think it's important to know, even at the beginning, that like
I will say,
this,
just from the beginning, even when the former employees and colleagues are talking about her, it comes off very sexist to me.
yes, I do
Because
want to,
the
that was the
first
first
thing that
thing.
is mentioned about her is not really related to her work, it's her appearance.
Yes, like,
They
oh, she
all
has big
comment they
eyes.
all comment on her appearance, her hair, and things like that, how she looked. And I feel like generally I noticed that throughout the documentary, whenever like the colleagues would refer to her or complain about her, it seemed sexist to me. And I'm
Well,
not going to be giving Lisa Frank a lot of credit here because it sounds like she was, frankly, a bad manager and a bad person to do business with. And she was doing awful things to people who really wanted to succeed in the creative field and was stealing their ideas and work. And like I said, not giving them compensation or credit for them. So I'm not trying to be very kind to her, but at the same
no.
time, the way that people spoke of her and talked about and complained about her was very sexist.
Well, also, I think like it bears in mind that this is 20 interviews with 20 people. There was like there had to have been more information provided. I actually
Hmm.
think that the documentary itself was incredibly sexist because the
Yes.
visualizations are like they do like giant cartoons of Lisa Frank
Hmm.
from time to time. They do like these weird, and it's mostly her. Like it's definitely not as much about like James Green and things like that. And like
James Green is her former husband.
yes, sorry. It's mostly about her. They're all like just these like a little bit dismissive cartoons that they show from time to time
Hmm.
on this. And like they had to have had more footage with those people because at points like they do seem to defend Lisa as like a person, but also like the cuts are mostly just mocking her appearance or saying things that aren't
Yes.
really that relevant. And
Do these
I'm
like
sorry.
what are those called? Like reimagined
Yeah.
scenes. And
Yes.
they come off really odd. And I do feel like this and this maybe is just because James Green in this documentary rubbed me in such a wrong way. Like he's an incredible narcissist.
Oh yeah.
And I was very bothered by him from the get-go, but I do feel like even though they portray him
As
fairly
ridiculous. Yeah.
fairly ridiculous, it does seem skewed in his favor. The documentary does. And I don't know if it's just because he was willing to work with them to provide info so that they actually had something to work with there or what the situation was, but I was like, this is odd because it's like they're definitely portraying him in a way that feels like, yeah, this is genuinely how he is. But at the same time, almost like, but he's also better.
It was weird, like, well, he's a better businessman. And the thing that
And I
confused
don't
me about
understand
this,
why.
the thing that confused me the most about this is the fact that a lot of what I learned, if I learned this about a male CEO from the 70s to 90s to early 2000s, even stealing the material up until today, I would literally not be shocked. And I
Sure.
and I get why it's interesting because Lisa Frank was such an institution, but at the same time, like there didn't seem to be any awareness of the fact that like this was a time of like glitter and greed, for lack of a better term, of like,
Hmm.
hey, guess what happened during the like 80s, during the Reagan era? Like things shifted and these companies started making more and more money and not paying their people correctly. So it's not shocking that Lisa Frank did this, other than the fact
Hmm.
that she is a woman who owned a business who became very popular.
Yes.
And it is incredibly dismissive to like not point that out. Like like James Green is the first to be like, I'm the one who built this entire company. And like there
Well,
were employees.
he says directly in like I think one of the first things he says in the documentary is like there would be no Lisa Frank without James Green. And it's like I don't know. I mean,
There might not have been like as strong of a company if he's like the company brains behind it and she was more creative and she was less likely to like have the things that she did on time. But she could have also just hired another manager. Like it sounds like she was the vision of like what made Lisa Frank itself because even like artists who talk about like, yeah, James was like really obsessed with like cityscapes and landscapes, but she kind of knew to like do the animals and make those front and center because like
it
little
also
girls would
seems
like
like though
those.
that
Like,
he was a very corrupt boss and
yeah.
manager too, where it was implied that he was maybe having affairs with certain people who
With
were
that
making business
HR
decisions.
person.
Yes. And that like it seemed like things were being covered up, et cetera, et cetera. And he wasn't too ashamed of throwing around that everyone kind of thought he was really attractive that worked for them, and that it was kind of implied like right away that even before him and Lisa were in a relationship that it was like, oh, they're both so attractive, like obviously they're gonna get
Right.
together, and they did. And then things went downhill quickly. But it's such a weird situation because I think that James Green is talked about in this way where they're like, oh yes, he's such an effective boss, but then in the same hand, on the same token, they're literally saying like, but he did a lot of bad things management wise. Like he would really criticize us, he would do these things, and he was like supposedly pulling the strings, and I just and then he in turn is trying to blame things on Lisa Frank,
Well, it's
and
also a
I
weird
it's
thing where
confusing.
it sounds like day to day he was the management, but she's like more of an art director, which is
Hmm.
also
That's
fine for
that's a legitimate
CEOs.
thing.
Like CEOs often aren't doing day to day management of companies. Those are like
Yes,
COOs, like chief operating
operating.
officers, are into the operations. And like the CEO doesn't have a lot of meetings with
Hmm.
people. And like it wasn't interested in teaching people about that structure. It just seemed to be like, well, he was the boss actually, and
Yeah,
she just was home raising the kids. And it's like, yeah, can we talk about how hard it had to have been to be the name brand and creative director, but you couldn't go into the office because you had to raise your children? Like that also does have, and again, no positivity towards Lisa Frank. She does seem like a bad company person,
sure.
like, but so are a lot of CEOs who are men, and it did feel like it had this weird obsession with the fact that she was a woman, a mother,
Mm-hmm.
and a bad boss. And it's like, well, yeah, that is, you always hope women will do it better, but not every single woman is going to do it that way, especially in the
Yeah.
world we live in.
Well, and it just seemed like the way that they kind of framed this, even when because they do bring in the one son. I think it was Hunter, right? The older
It was
one.
Hunter. So Hunter also agreed to do this. So like Lisa Frank did not agree to do the documentary.
She
She
released
is
a statement
raising
that was at the bottom of, or
every
at the,
single episode.
yeah,
And she named, so her husband's name was James Green. So they had Hunter Green and Forest Green.
haha,
Uh
colors.
haha colors, haha greens, artistic people. And so Hunter at one point discloses that he went to live with his dad when he was a teenager. And one of the most like skewed discussions I've ever heard, where like obviously Lisa Frank could have been a terrible mother. I don't know what she was like as a mother. They didn't really tell me much
It's
about
very
it.
hard to say because it's implied that there's a level of emotional abuse. It doesn't seem like at least I'm not remembering any physical abuse being brought up, but the son Hunter mentions like Lisa yelling at him and stuff and him
Yes.
feeling scared at home, etc., and wanting to see his dad and not being able to.
But also the examples he uses are like being a 14-year-old kid and getting into fights with his mom and then calling his
Exactly.
dad and telling him to come get him, and the parents not having a good structural support for one another,
Yes.
and the dad just being like, okay, Hunter can come live with me, and then he's like, well, my dad did it. And like this is
And
why
the
this,
parents being in a very messy divorce
yes,
versus there are relationships where the divorce situation is done and it's very like an amicable situation and they work together co-parenting and it works out wonderful for the children. That's an ideal situation, but this seems like a situation where
it was
James and
not.
Lisa did not get along and it does seem like there's a little manipulation of the children as well to
Yes.
try and bring them over to either side.
Right. And like it does seem like Forrest, I'm not sure, has a very big relationship with James Green or Hunter Green. Like it doesn't feel like
He
they're
seems
all,
well, and they like James mentions, oh yeah, we're still working on Forrest to try and get him
which is a
to
weird way to
hang
phrase
out with
that.
us.
Like
Yes, especially when you've already listened to an hour of James Green talking about how wonderful he is and how he's fantastic and so smart and so artistic and all these things. And you're just like, you're the biggest narcissist and most annoying human being I've ever listened to.
and we cannot diagnose someone, but like in this documentary, he literally the first things out of his mouth is, I am Lisa Frank.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
he
I'm almost comfortable diagnosing him like narcissist.
At one point they show like a clip from the wedding, and obviously like weddings are long and you could do something, but
They
like
had a strange wedding too.
they had a strange wedding, but like in the wedding he's like literally like being like, get that pillow away from that child, and like they're like, oh well, he's he's so creative and he just has an image, and I'm like,
It was their ring bearer, and he's like, I don't
yeah,
want that kid in the
get that,
picture
get
here.
it. And so it's just like it's kind, and his son like obviously has a huge hero worship of
There
his
is a
dad,
big problem there where it's just like it seems like that's why I said there's got to be some kind of manipulation here because Hunter seems to very much think that his dad is the most fantastic human being alive.
which is a clip that went viral because this entire time, all they're telling us is Lisa Frank never worked a day in her life and it was all James Green and da 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 da. But then there's like this clip where Hunter's talking about, like, well, that I was at a baseball game and I remember my mom didn't see my hit because she was working, and she was just selfish. And they go, well, why was your
Odd.
dad why is it selfish when your mom was working, but with your dad it was just because he was so, like, I forget the word they used, but so like motivated. And he
Yeah,
goes, well,
he's determined and
and she's selfish. And he goes, well, I just don't think she did very much. And I was like, but the story literally is she worked through your game
the
and that's
thing
why you're
was
upset about it.
the
Like,
things that he was saying Hunter that he was saying directly mirrored the things that his father James Green was saying, which
yes.
is why it feels like it was a narrative that was fed to him throughout many years that he likely didn't have a great home situation dealing with divorce and parents arguing and everything like that. And then I think wanted to be with his dad more likely. I'm just speculating all this just
Yeah.
based on what I know. I can't know for sure. But it seemed like he wanted a stronger relationship with his dad and had kind of a rocky one with his mom. But again, like you said, Hannah, there needs to be a little more nuance given to this because it does seem like he was very much a teenager who
Mm-hmm.
uh, a little dramatic and
Speaking from personal experience with like
hard to
difficult
perceive.
living situations with multiple of my family members, like there's usually, if someone's getting structure at home that they disagree with and they're in high school, like it's always seen as like, how dare you guys?
Yeah, I
Like,
I do feel like teenagers, unfortunately, you gotta look a little deeper into the situation because sometimes they fail to see, or I think they see a little more injustice done upon them. And
yes.
I also have been guilty of this as a teen as well, thinking that I was greatly unjust in greatly unjust situations. But it does come off like James Green fed a story and a narrative to Hunter, who then he said even that he values his dad's life more than his own, basically,
Yes.
which
And
is
his dad
haunting.
seems to love that. Like, and his dad, like, kind of denied being that bad of a boss, but it's a lot of people saying his dad did all these things and was terrible and like
But it's such a
screamed at
weird thing too,
people.
where like the employees would like talk about him screaming at people or managing people poorly, but not in like a super bad way where then they'd be like, but then once he left, things really went down the tubes because Lisa was way worse. And it's like, really? I find that hard to believe.
Well, I think that goes back to like, I don't think it sounds like she was a very effective manager. Like,
No, but how
but
could he
she
have been
was the
that
head.
good?
I know, but she was the head of a company. And like, yeah, managers do have to do things that they're not supposed to do. But like, he did run the day to day. That is hard when you lose a COO and like like the top brass
Sure.
is not willing to do what they need to do to get the work done. But at the same time, it's like, ma'am, like, or like all these people. See, when I watched it, I did think like a lot of people seemed to be a little bit sympathetic towards Lisa, but I didn't think the documentary itself was sympathetic towards Lisa. Because you have people who are
Yeah, I
like,
would agree with that
I
take.
still have personal relationships with her. I think she made mistakes. I don't think she's the most effective boss, but like her heart was in the right place.
Do
And
you
you,
think though that that also was kind of a sexist take? The way that they treated it like that, like the employees that like if she was a man, would they have been less sympathetic? I don't know. I just feel
I have
like
no idea.
it's so hard for me to like set the sexism aside because I keep trying to it just feels like there's all these undertones of sexism that exist within this company, even from the employees and the way that they react to the different management styles and everything. And I'm like, I
I
don't know how to
know.
feel about this.
Well, like it was a weird documentary because we also during this documentary, Laura like discussed the fact that there was a rumor going around that James Green was having an affair with Rhonda, who was the executive vice president and also like an HR person when they started out. And that edit was also weird towards her, where like,
Strange, because then they bring in her husband who is
oh, that
ill.
was that was the weirdest part of the entire documentary. My sister-in-law pointed out two really strange moments in this documentary, and one was her being like, "I did not have an affair," and then talking and her husband having to come into the room to hug her, and we're like, "This was obviously set up to like do this." Like
Right.
it's so choreographed. It's just strange. Like there's no way this documentary crew was just sitting there with her husband in the room.
And
Like
also James Green kind of like smirked and smiled about it, like maybe.
I know.
And
Well, and
I was not convinced that there was no affair. Like, I
well,
wanted to
especially when the
not
first
believe it.
thing, again, I do blame some of the editing of this documentary,
Oh,
but the
for
first
sure.
thing out of Rhonda's mouth in this documentary is like, well, James Green was a genius.
Yeah,
And then they were
no.
like, oh, everyone thought they were sleeping together. And then she was like, no, we're not. And her husband has to come on the scene to hug her. And it's so,
And it's like
like,
revealed that he's ill or something like that,
yeah.
that the husband is, and that she's been taking care of him or something like this
And
is
she admits to like
strange.
firing hundreds of people. She does not seem
Oh,
sad
in a
about it
really bad
in a
way.
really bad way. She's like, yeah, I did that. And it's like, are you
And
serious?
they would question her on the technique and the things that she did in terms of like laying off tons and tons of people in non-ethical ways, and she would say, "Oh no, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
Absolutely did not happen."
And but she would
It's
admit
like
like, well, I
multiple people
fired
are
everyone, but I definitely
agreeing
was
that
it was
this
on the
did.
up and up. Yeah, and she just like she seemed like the worst. So you have these two people who were like the
Mhm.
head of the company before Lisa, and they're
Who
getting
suck.
like who suck. And it just seems like overall, I'm like, oh, it just seems like a bad company, but why are we interested this much in like the quote unquote Lisa Frank of it all? Like
Yeah.
it was a weird obsession
It seemed
that
like it was a misguided documentary where it was like, it's
yeah.
about Lisa Frank, but really it should be about James Green.
Well, and like it's a weird vibe where I remember when I was watching the like trailer for it, someone was like, you know, you probably thought that Lisa Frank was creating all these things, but she wasn't. I'm like, no one thought that. What adult human in their 30s and 40s who purchased Lisa Frank when
But
they were children
who I
look
think
back on
even
that,
children understand the concept of not a single person
right? Like
creates that much stuff.
they know what a brand name is.
Yes.
You don't just think like, oh, Lisa Frank is
Like if
out
you
there.
can understand the concept of like a Disney movie having multiple artists and creators involved, like
What a so I
it's
always thought it
not
was
that
like
hard to wrap your brain around.
it was very strange to see that and be like, no, they didn't. Like everyone knew that there were multiple artists. And like, so the story is, hey,
You know,
did you
and
know
that is
Lisa
an
Frank?
interesting thing too, where it's just like, do people actually believe some of that stuff that it's like, if there's a name associated with a company, do they think that that is the sole person working on all the
Right.
things? Like,
Like,
really?
and again, with people being like, well, I never saw Lisa. And it's like, well, she's the creative director. Did she need to be in the office, especially if she
No,
had kids at home? Like, no, that's actually not the role. And it
that's
felt
not
like
her job.
it felt like they were telling us like 15% of the story. And I'm
Yeah.
like, but like 85 of it is context that people should have before they walk into a documentary like this. And once they know that, it's kind of confusing that you're talking about it like
It
this.
also seemed to like, and this is just me knowing from like working for businesses that have been that are considered small businesses but are in periods of growth, where when I started working for these businesses, the CEO was very involved, and like the lower level employees would see him and everything like that. But as the business grew, more people are brought in,
Mm-hmm.
and there's different levels of like who does what thing, like work is delegated and the CEO is not around as much. And I know
Exactly.
that there were definitely like growing pains like that in the companies I worked for, where it was a lot of the lower level employees. Like, I'll admit, I also fell into this too, where when you don't get to interact with the boss as much anymore, there is a little bit of like, well, he's never around. Where's he at?
Right.
Like that sucks that he's not interacting with us anymore. Remember when he used to come and chat with us and ask how we were doing and stuff like that? And I wonder if there's some of that involved too with the Lisa Frank situation, where it was like there were a lot of growing pains and she
Mm-hmm.
wasn't exactly sure how to manage those situations as well either, and
Yeah.
didn't do it in the best way. And so then there was some resentment and some feelings of being left behind by her employees who didn't really understand the growth of the company as well.
Yes. And I think like the more important part that you and I kind of touched on was like later in life, Lisa, who is part of all of these lawsuits because she kept trying to do like licensing deals with people,
Yeah.
but it seems like she is a micromanager on the like creation side of things. And she does not understand like certain parts of the business that, again, like creative director, neither here nor there. I don't think she's good in this, but she reneged on a lot of licensing agreements that like put companies out of business because they were
Yes.
smaller than her and they had to take on a lot of the products. And like some of it was definitely her fault, where they were like, could you
Hmm.
please approve this? And she would be like, it's not perfect. I want this. I want this. And then she would insist on them paying her for something that she wasn't approving for
Hmm.
final product. And like they talk about how one of the people literally had to take her on a vacation to Greece and like take her
Hmm.
kid around. And she ended up being like, well, you guys didn't meet your commitment, so I no longer have to pay you. And then she came out with like a collab that used a lot of their similar things in cheaper products. And like it just wasn't as good. And she like ruined that company. Um, and that is not
Is
great.
that the situation where it was like a hotel, like almost
No,
Airbnb or
that
something?
was
Or
the other situation where there was an
okay.
Airbnb that she started after they like liked
Yeah,
something
there
from
was
an artist
an
and it
artist who
influenced.
started it. Was this an Airbnb that was like Lisa Frank inspired, but that artist had created all of the art themselves? And
So she created art in her like apartment, and then they said that there was like some place very close by to her home, through hotels.com that was like Lisa Frank hotel rooms, and she felt that it looked very similar
but
to
Lisa Frank had sent messages on Instagram, I believe,
like the
acknowledging the
company
work and
had.
everything and kind of like making it seem like a deal would be worked out when then what
I
ended
don't.
up coming to fruition was like basically Lisa Frank just kind of ended up stealing the idea and working with hotels.com and having these Lisa Frank rooms.
So I
And
don't
even
think that.
the original creator had said that people were like messaging them and being like, "Oh, congrats on this huge deal." And she was like, "Oh, well, I didn't
So
have
she.
anything to do with
So
it."
that this is the one thing I was a little bit confused about with that storyline. I don't think
Hmm.
that's necessarily what happened. I think what happened
Okay.
was like this girl was sharing her apartment. It was decorated in a very colorful way. And Lisa Frank's company was like liking the posts. And then they did this like collab with hotels.com where they like built this thing directly across from this woman's home. And like people assumed that she was involved because it was like color
Hmm.
splash pop-up rooms that looked similar to her home.
Hmm.
So she felt that Lisa Frank stole those ideas. I will
Okay.
say I
I guess I was
didn't
confused
look.
with the Instagram situation because it seemed like I
I
can't remember
looked.
now. I thought it was mentioned that there was like some kind of message or something like that, but maybe it was just liking.
Yeah, it
And
was like liking and saying like, "Oh my gosh, I love your vibe," or something, like commenting a
okay.
couple of times, but never asking for a collab or anything like that.
Okay.
I did think that one was a little bit more muddy because she was kind of like Lisa Frank ruined my life, and I was from the
Well,
photos.
I,
I didn't
I
research
will say
enough
they
where.
ended up being evicted and stuff from their home, didn't they, over all of
Oh,
this
I don't
drama?
know. I don't know. I don't remember that. I remember the other two like had to file for bankruptcy and everything like that.
Hmm.
I don't remember her getting evicted because of this drama, but like that one was a little bit murkier to me because based on my own review of the two photos, they didn't look that similar. Like it's
Okay.
just like that was a strange story to me that again felt a little bit like weird to put in the documentary without more evidence just because they're like
Yeah.
photos of the side by sides. I was like, I don't actually see that much of similarities unless the argument is like you can't have colorful splashed rooms and rainbows and clouds if someone lives close by. I was like, well, I don't know if I agree with that, but I also didn't look up more into um like did they
Background on the
actually look
story.
that similar or didn't they? Because I think they looked like a little similar, but they weren't like, oh my God, that's the same exact thing, you know?
Okay. Yeah, I guess I didn't look that much into it at all,
Yeah.
but it just struck me as a little icky the way that that was all presented. And they did have that person who was involved with that on the documentary.
Yeah.
So it is skewed in their favor because this is an anti Lisa Frank thing. So
I
yeah.
felt worse about the two people who did the licensing agreement when like Lisa Frank was literally dragging her heels and then they had to
Mhm.
go like out of business and like did all this stuff, you
And
know.
this is maybe showing to our different experiences because you have a law degree and can pick out some of these things and I cannot, where I'm just like, well, that's not nice.
Y- w-
So,
Well, and that one was just strange because again, like it's hard to show like content stealing when it comes to stuff like
yeah.
that, where it's like, look it up, Beyonce steals choreography like
Hmm.
blatantly and has been sued and settles outside of court. But it's like, well, at what point, like how many moves in a choreographed dance do you have to do before you are in fact stealing that dance? And how many are you
Sure.
doing in which you are inspired by, you know? So I could very much see where it's like, yes, it is a like unicorn inspired room that's very colorful. And then Lisa Frank is literally doing it right across the street from you. That does feel very shady and not great.
Hmm.
But it didn't look so similar where I'm like, well, you can't sue saying like you stole my idea, you know?
Okay.
Where the other one, it's like, no, they were in a contractual agreement together and she agreed that they could license her stuff. And then she's not approving of things and she's dragging her heels and they want to make this like higher end product that like the people are agreeing to. And then when it all goes down, Lisa Frank's company is like, we weren't a part of that. All we did was support them, and this happened afterwards. And it's like, are you serious? Like,
Yeah.
if you're the one who dragged your feet, then it is your fault. Then you're just, you know,
And I
and
will
you're
say
making them pay
too,
you
maybe this,
millions of
and
dollars.
this is maybe just like not totally related, but in terms of like the stealing of art or copying of art, I, I don't know that this particular brand is really that out there. You know what I mean? It
Yeah.
seems fairly like, and I enjoyed Lisa Frank stuff. Like I had the coloring books and I had the stickers and stuff like that. I don't know that there's anything that like out there unique about it besides that it's very colorful,
Yeah,
that
it's
kids are drawn to color. And I that's why I mean like I don't know. I think other people could really create things that are just as attractive, you know what I mean?
yes.
So that's I guess where I'm getting into where you're talking about like is this art that was stolen or not? Where
Right.
it's like it does seem like it's fairly generic to just have animals that are really colorful and gliding around on rainbows.
But can we also laugh when Hunter introduced himself as I am Hunter? I am the was he the cheetah where he's like,
They
I'm
were the two
Hunter.
cubs.
Oh
That
yeah,
they
I
named the two
was
cubs after
but it
the
was like a
kids.
cheetah cub and a tiger cub, and one
Yep.
was one and one was the other. And he was like, I am Hunter, I am the cheetah cub. It's like,
Yep.
okay, sir. And that also doesn't help where it's like these people being like, you know, that my she was awful, da 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 da. And you have this like Hunter, and I'm like, Hunter, what do you do for a living? Like, because I bet it's not exactly
Not
the
too
most.
much, probably.
Yeah, like you're probably just a rich kid. And I do think that
Kind of
that's
a little
hard.
nepo baby, I kind of feel like.
It feels like a nepo baby who probably has quite a bit of money from like this empire. Like their parents like had a ton of money,
Yeah.
seems to have kept a lot of their money. And I do think
Well,
like
and I don't
showing
know if
him
we've mentioned
off
it earlier, but like the company was divided 51 and 49, which was something that James Green was very upset by later on, that he ended up with 49% of the company and Lisa maintained majority of the company. And that kind of made me giggle a little bit, but it's like, why would she give up
over the
more
majority.
of the
Well,
company that is
and
her
again,
name and brand?
I'm pretty sure he was the COO, which means you're the chief operating officer. You're not the executive officer.
Hmm.
And she gifted him 49%. And then when
Yeah.
they divorced, she said, I want that back. And a judge said, yeah, that's her company. She gifted that to you. She
Yeah.
can take it back. And it's like, that does suck. Like, because if this happened to a woman, yeah, like that would have been like a power dynamic. But that gets back into
Hmm.
the sexism where it's like, well, it
Yep.
happened to a man, so that makes it interesting. And I don't know.
They have a
Like,
weird relationship too, just from the beginning, where like he mentions that no one ever expected him to be married that long or anything. And like, okay. Um, yeah, and that they were shocked that he was married 10 years and
yeah.
because he's not the marriage type, and that their wedding was a lot of people were like, oh, it was such a beautiful overblown wedding. thought it looked strange, but
I mean, it
they
looked
all
very
mentioned
90s.
like the horse peeing during
Oh
the
yeah.
ceremony and stuff, and how I don't know, it just seemed like they had this magical, somewhat one-sided wedding where it seemed like he didn't seem as into her as she
Yes.
was him. And I can't know for sure, but it just seems from like even the footage that they show where it just is like she looks really into that relationship and he's not feeling it.
No, that I
And
agree.
and then it becomes just more and more like him feeling like everyone's out to get him because he's such a
Yeah.
genius and not understanding the way that businesses work or how she is
The
technically
name of
like
the company and like you don't always get to
it's
have like your name.
warranted for
Like
her to have things from her own company, that type of thing. And yeah, and he doesn't necessarily put down any of the ideas that they or any of the suggestions of like if he was unfaithful to her or anything either. So there's just so much at play in this relationship, and I don't know.
I know. It seems like this is just kind of a bad
Also, I
documentary.
found the
Like,
quote from that Rhonda woman when they asked her about if she was having an affair with James, and she says, "I did not have an affair with James Green. I have not had an affair with anybody ever in my life except my husband."
oh yeah, there we go. What a
And I was like,
strange way to
"Okay,
phrase
that's a
that.
weird
Well,
way
the
to
other
say
part
that."
that my sister-in-law thought was so funny was the one man who was talking about being diabetic and like not being able to eat. And then all of a sudden
Yeah,
his diabetes like alarm goes off and he goes, "Oh, is that me?" And she was like, "Well, they obviously staged that. Can you imagine telling a man
and
that
he's
that's what
like,
he has to
"Nah, I'm
do?"
good."
Like, yeah, it was very
It's like it
strange.
doesn't
So
sound
like,
like you are because you needed to be able to go get something to eat before, and they didn't allow you to do that. Rhonda was terrible and didn't let you
right.
eat.
So I don't know. It feels like this was a badly run company that people are only interested in because a woman happened to be the lead of it. But like many companies like this while we were growing up crashed and burned pretty
I mean,
hard. So
I will say, like, none of this was shocking. None of this
no,
was shocking information. It seemed very much like what you would expect. That I'm sure there are 4,001 or millions, honestly, stories similar to this in
yeah.
terms of like messy divorces and businesses being a mess.
Rich people
Like,
being ridiculous, like, and not treating their employees correctly. Like, I just feel
yeah,
like I learned literally nothing from this documentary.
right. I'm
Like,
not gonna lie. I expected more shock factor. I expected to be
yeah,
really like, what? I can't believe I didn't know that. And I did not come away with that feeling at all.
it is so anticlimactic. Like, it was a
Yes.
while to, other than like,
And
I
honestly,
do
I don't
think
think the
her,
documentary was that well done either. Like
no,
I
I thought it
think
was
that
really
it felt like
bad.
a hodgepodge of things that they thought they were doing something and they didn't do a good job. They bring in a podcaster at one point who is like very interested and did a lot of research into Lisa Frank, and I feel like I probably would learn more from that woman's podcast than I would this entire documentary because I'm
Yeah,
sure she's put more time into it because this documentary was just a hodgepodge of information,
with
seemed
weird little
weirdly
cartoons in
skewed
it.
at times and had bad dramatizations. Like I I just didn't know what the goal was here.
But honestly, Hunter Green is incredibly meme worthy.
Oh
Like,
yes.
that man is honestly, I would cover
I
my
will say
drink.
too, like
Like, he was ridiculous.
they kind of like give us a where are they now a little bit at the end where they reveal that James Green now lives in Mexico and has a bar there
Shocking.
that he's making a bunch of art for, and he shows some of the art and he like kind of acts like this is the like most wonderful thing that he's done, and this art is not that good. It's very mediocre.
Again,
And
I've seen certain TikToks where a woman was like, "What did Hunter Green do to get kicked off TikTok?" And she was like, "He was posting all this shit about like, look at these two paintings." And she was like, and he would be like, "Look at my amazing father's artwork." And she's like, and he would pull up the most government ass bullshit that you would see in a government building. And I was like, "Yeah, she's right. It was really bad."
yeah, I don't know why he thinks he had. and that's maybe just a thing where it's like sometimes people just think that they have more talent and skill than they actually do. Like too many people told them they were awesome or a genius
Right.
that they started to believe it too much. And I feel like maybe he is one of, I shouldn't say maybe, he is one of those people that just
Yeah.
kind of thinks he's way more awesome than he is. And I I don't think he's that talented, and he seems to be very self-obsessed and not a very nice person.
Agreed. And his son and just I'm so baffled by the hero worship of like a parent like
Oh,
that. Like
it's
it's
just
so strange.
uh, here's the thing. I love my parents, but they're human. Like they
E-
you cannot have that kind of hero worship of anyone.
But I'm so sorry, like to have that lack of wherewithal that at 14 or 15, you may not have had the best relationship. And like he like has this memory of his mom, like he's like, well, she called and she screamed at me like you promised you were coming back. And I'm like, okay, so
That's a
yes, a
safety
parent.
concern for parents.
I was like, yeah, a parent should not be screaming at their child. You are correct. You are a teenager. She is not supposed to emotionally lay that at your feet. At
I'm
the same
I
time, if you are saying like, Mom, just let me go stay with dad for a week and then I'll come back, and then all of a sudden the dad's like, he's not coming back, like a parent will likely be upset and yell at their child, like, hey, you said you needed a week. What is going on?
I
Like,
also feel like too like we often don't extend enough grace to parents in these types of situations where the kids will tell us the story of how the parent yelled at them or whatever, and we can be like, well, you shouldn't be yelling at your kids or whatever. But
right,
it's like there's so many things going on in her life and stressors as well. And also then to be concerned for the safety of your child in that moment, maybe not knowing where he was or what's going
right.
on. Like there's not enough nuance in this situation to know what actually was going on. And I
Wild that
do
that was
think
his
like,
take.
yeah, I do think too that it's like, yeah, I definitely have seen situations where parents get very upset because they're concerned about their child or they've
Yeah.
had like I work in customers. I'm not a parent, but I work in customer service. If I have a bad day, I might react poorly to
Mm-hmm.
someone and you don't know like what was happening on that given day, and she could be a bad mom, but she could also be just an okay mom who's trying really hard and has a lot happening. And we're not really given the clear picture of what's going on via this documentary. So it's hard to say. I think you and I are both very much dancing the line of like, things don't seem great, but we're not going to be quick to judge either side here because we don't have
Right.
enough information. And it seems like there's very much a hero worship of a man who comes off as very narcissistic.
I will say, based on what that son told me, he did not tell me anything that made me like, wow, you had such a terrible mom. Like,
No,
nothing
I
in
didn't
what
get
he
vibes of
told
that
me.
either.
It was like, it seems like your mom was an incredibly flawed, rich human being, and you felt
Well, and
neglected
people
as a
that
child.
were
Like,
employees said that she loved being a mom, I think at one
yeah,
point. Like they didn't seem to imply that she was a bad mom or didn't care
right.
for her children. So I really do think, unfortunately, this is very much a messy divorce situation for
Hmm.
a Nepo baby who has a lot of hero worship of his
Imagine
dad.
being a Nepo baby and it's because your mom is Lisa Frank.
I don't have to imagine. I can see it in this documentary.
Yeah, I know, but that's what a way to be. I mean, like,
I mean,
who,
don't be like that. People just
no,
don't.
please don't. But yeah, this was so weird. I'm glad we watched it, and I'm glad you watched it with me because I don't think describing it on the podcast I could have like gone this in depth and made it make sense.
Well, I
Because
questioned at the start of this. I'm like, do you think we can talk about this for a period of time? Because it seemed like we didn't learn very much at all here.
no,
And I don't honestly know if this documentary was necessary. I think that they maybe needed to do more homework if they thought they were
yeah.
coming up with something so monumental.
Then like she was a company in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
that's every company in the 70s, 80s, and 90s acted like this. I'm so
Hmm.
sorry, but it.
Yeah. I watched a long time ago. I might have talked about it on the podcast at one point. There's a Netflix documentary, American Factory, which is
Oh yeah,
about
you did
a
talk about that.
yeah, it's about a glass company which is bought out by a Chinese company and how they have to go undergo a lot of different situations related to the safety and the like benefits and healthcare and uh, wages of the employees and starting a union, etc. And I found that entirely more interesting because there's
Right.
cultural aspects that are different in terms of these different companies and everything. And there was just so much more like it was very much a different style of documentary as well, where we not only had interviews, but we were following people in this company as transitions were happening. But I think that one was so much better done than this,
Yeah.
where it was like we're getting different sides, we're seeing different opinions, we're seeing the cultural divide, we're learning about the two companies and their owners, etc. And this one we did not learn that much. And I think
No.
it would have helped a little bit if they would have had Lisa give more than just a statement being like, sorry that some of
Better
this stuff
things to
happened, but there's
come.
better things to come. Rainbow. Like,
Yeah.
and James Green is not the viewpoint we needed.
No.
I was very bothered by him. Very
He
bothered.
was the
Oh,
worst.
he's more than the worst. I
Yeah.
just
Yeah. And I do think like if people watch this and they're like, it wasn't as skewed. I do think like the interviewees did seem to say like, hey, James was terrible. Lisa seemed nice, just a little bit inept. And I do think like
mhm.
that it can still be inherently sexist, like Laura is saying.
Yeah,
But like the people did seem to have bad things to say about both people. It wasn't like they were like,
for
"Oh,
sure.
James Green is amazing." Everyone was like, "No, he
It
sucked."
there
And
was that one
then
woman who he was possibly having an affair with, but was not.
I mean, her
And
first
she
words
did
out of her
say he
mouth
was a
were he was a
genius.
genius. And it didn't help when people were like, "Well, everyone thought they were sleeping together." And then she's like,
Yeah.
"I knew the rumors." And it's like, "Well, you don't seem to."
And he's like, I knew the
Like
rumors, but that wasn't happening because I was too busy keeping diabetic people from eating.
eating. Yeah. Just so bad. Yeah. All right. Well, Laura, anything
We
that
did
we
it.
didn't touch?
We recorded an episode on this documentary
Yeah,
where
we did it.
nothing was learned.
But we hope you learned something about us as we did a deep dive into
It's all
glitter
about the
and greed.
friendships we made along the way.
It's all about the content, baby. Lisa Frank would appreciate that. But yeah, so thank you for joining us on this very random TV Tuesday. We hope you join us
Apologies.
tomorrow for our regularly scheduled programming. And if you enjoyed this content, please let us know another TV Tuesday you think we should be covering over on our
Yeah.
Discord or email us at OWWR Pod or at gmail.com or follow us on all of the social platforms that we are available. You can usually find them in our link tree over on Instagram. But we're everywhere at OWWR Pod. And we will see you all tomorrow for, a deep dive into not glitter and greed where we can actually learn
Thank goodness.
something. All right. Bye.
Bye.